work with than the ones that we do work with. We're working with a lot of the big open source model vendors. And we've also been helping all sorts of global enterprises to implement or update their governance frameworks to be able to fit AI within that. And we'll probably say a few more of those, talk about a few more of those aspects during this panel today. And I'm going to ask my excellent panelists to quickly introduce themselves and tell us why they are exactly the right people to be listening to on data governance issues.
Hello, everybody. I'm Shekhar Vemuri. I'm the CTO for the analytics group at EXL. We are a data and analytics company. If you see a few folks running around with orange shoes on, that's our gang. So that's us. But just as a background, data governance, I've been on both sides, both setting up some frameworks and policies for some companies, mid to large, but mostly on the side which enables it from a technology perspective, or in some instances even a consumer, right? Ran data science teams, ran analytics teams, and even built a data security, data privacy product. So been at the intersection of definition, consumption, and enabling data governance. So look forward to the conversation.
I'm Charles Smart. I'm the director for Data Governance Center of Excellence for FactSpan. We are a data analytics company. And we focus a lot on the full data management lifecycle, from engineering, laid down the governance framework for organizations, helping them to figure out what that strategy is going to look like, and of course, helping them to mature that as we think about AI governance and where that is going to be leading. So that's our main focus. My background, very similar to Snehar, has been in the operational side, helping practically to help organizations set up their data management programs. In addition to that, of course, figuring out with GDPR and some of the new regulations, what organizations need to set up for laying the foundation for a really good data governance framework.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jie Yu. I'm with Johnson & Johnson. So my role in J&J, I'm the head of digital product management in supply chain function. And my team support both sectors of medical device and pharma. In J&J, so supply chain is one of the three functional pillars, along with R&D and commercial, which is essentially the sales and marketing division of J&J. So digital and data science really kind of play a critical role in day-to-day operation of our supply chain function around the world. Data governance itself, definitely I view it as a core piece and part of the DNA of our overall digital operating model. So the master data management, basic data curation, data quality, and then data security and privacy. And then on top of that, all those advanced data analytics, data science applications, the whole value chain, right, really kind of drive the backbone of our business nowadays, generate lots of value. So I look forward to this panel session to discuss with my panelists, right, how to leverage data governance to drive more, the value to different industrial sectors. Yeah.
Hello, I'm Sachin Kothari, Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer for Johnson Controls. And this is probably one of my favorite panels, not to be biased, but you can't have good AI without proper data governance, right? So what does Johnson Controls do? We are a building solutions provider. And also we have retail analytics to security solutions. So we're looking at, for our customers, we're looking at their grid data, their public data, employee data, along with occupancy data. So across the board, we're looking at every aspect of data. So think of a smart city provider. So to us, data is extremely important, and having governance around that, and particularly around AI, I think is the most essential component for getting AI framework right. And glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all. So an excellent panel. Let's start with the basics, shall we? So in a pre-AI world or outside of the context of pure AI projects, what do we think that good looks like when it comes to data governance? So if we're just sort of setting things out at a high level, what is the sort of the ideal that we ought to be shooting for?
So I think it starts with leadership. One of the main very important things. But of course, making sure that you're, when you think about good, you want to make sure that your data is accurate, right? You want to make sure that there's transparency around it. And you want to make sure that there is also really good ethics around how your data is being used. And those things are taken into consideration. The details of those pieces, however, you talk about data quality and integrity, you talk about your ethics framework, you talk about your privacy and your compliance, making sure that you're in line with all the different regulations that are out there. Of course, understanding your data, right? You can't govern something that you don't understand. So those are some of the core, high-level things that you want to think about when you think about data governance and what good looks like. It starts with leadership within the organization, and of course, trickling down to make sure the quality of that data is good, that it's being governed properly in terms of the compliance and the rules, and of course, that you are able to monitor that ongoing so that you understand how things are going to mature and keep track of any changes that are happening that could impact the organization.
And I'll add to that. I think that's absolutely right. And as you go down one notch down, right, as you have leadership buy-in, with that leadership buy-in, you must have proper policies. You must have proper records management programs. So within Johnson Controls, I also own, next to the privacy function, I also own the records information management function. So that encompasses for everything from internal assets to our commercial assets. So what does deletion retention schedules look like, from everything from HR records to finance records to our customer records across the board. So having those fundamental policies and attestation, accountability, and making sure you know where that data is, right? And that's the kind of the core essential function of what data governance, I think.
Maybe continue building on those two panelists, what they already shared, fully agreed with what you said. And then two more aspects I would add. One is the value, right? So value proposition. Very often, we view data governance as a foundation. But then the challenge is when we engage with senior executives, right, to invest in that space, how to communicate the value proposition story is important. And actually, without strong data foundation, right, you cannot do any data science, AI, machine learning use cases which generate huge amount of value, right, to the business. So we need to make that connection. We need to connect the dots, right? Connect those advanced analytics, data science, AI, machine learning applications, right, to the data foundation, to the data governance model, which truly enable all this potential. And then how we even try to even quantify those business values and tie back to the foundation as well. Another aspect is ownership. In large organizations like Johnson & Johnson, we operate across all different regions and with different sectors and functions. Very often, different stakeholder groups involved in this exercise, in these efforts. The data ownership is very critical as well. And also that tie back to the policy, the regulations, the compliance, all those things that data ownership, right, really kind of drive that clarity in our ecosystem too. Yeah.
So good data governance. It's definitely a difficult problem, and as the other panelists laid out, a lot goes in. But coming in from a different side, just to add a little bit of a additional perspective. The way I've looked at it in the past is a couple of ways. So first and foremost, it's a journey, right? You're not done. You don't have it one day and you suddenly have it the next. That's not how it is, right? You likely will never have it. It's about how good of a job you as an organization are able to do it. So how are you moving from, say, siloed constructs to coordinated constructs, right? Not centralized, but coordinated. Whether it's federated, centralized, but it needs to be coordinated. How are you breaking things down such that there's easier communication across the organization? How are you, so a key part of this is you can have a policy, a strategy, structure, but unless the building blocks are coming together to enable it, it's extremely difficult to realize the value. So this is where, putting on the technology hat, a lot of times I've been the person responsible to enable this, right? Building in the processes, the systems. So how are you moving from like a very bespoke, varied ecosystem to a little bit more of a consistent ecosystem, right? So that you're not doing everything from scratch every single time. And then finally, automation, right? you have to wear that, you have to bake in that that thought process of automation as early as possible, because this is not something that you can manually stay on top. Yes, you would have data owners, data stewards, but are they being enabled and augmented by systems, tools, and do they have the right insights to be able to act upon it? So in the interest of time, maybe, yeah, just wanted to add that one perspective too.
No, thank you for that. And I think that, synthesizing a few of the thoughts that have come out there, I really like the idea of looking at the core value and understanding the use cases. I really like the idea that was pulled out in terms of that sort of top-down approach as well. And actually that reflects a few of my own experiences where organizations that don't necessarily get that right sometimes find that really critical decisions about how data is going to be stored or used or whatever are being made at a very low level by people who focus on what's easiest for them, not necessarily what's best for the organization. So is that kind of top-down approach something that is absolutely critical? Do we need to be thinking in terms of high-level strategy being sat at the very top of the organization, a set of tactical controls at that kind of middle layer, the policies, the frameworks, the committees, the contractual clauses, links into things like privacy and data protection and all those sorts of things, and then that difficult problem of operationalizing. How do we take a policy that someone like me has written that says this will be fair and unbiased, and actually proving that is true in practice? So, Sachin, just from your point of view, what are the you talked about that top-down approach, what are the layers that you see in your organization that sort of work really, really well?
Yeah, no, I think it's such an important step to get right. For us, I've in my other panel or discussion, I talked about this. So for us, it definitely is a top-down approach, all the way from our CEO. So our CEO has specific statements directly into our privacy center that creates that commitment that privacy is always integrated into everything we do. So whether it's from a position perspective to what we're doing from a principles-based approach down to what we're doing with design, right? So when you look at our products, the way you're able to come up with and be able to show that transparency requires that design element being integrated into how you're creating that framework. How are you managing in that data governance structure? And particularly, we're going to get into AI in a minute, but as you look at AI, you're looking at intensive amount of data, right? So if you don't have a proper data governance structure, that's going to lead you to several different issues. Whether you're integrating, external solutions or creating something on your own. And specifically, for companies like Johnson Controls, where we have such a tremendous amount of data that we're dealing with and creating that value as we're building out our data lake to create analytics, create ability to understand how this applies to other buildings, right? It is essential of understanding that data structure, understanding how we can reapply this data, being able to answer to regulators of what are we collecting, why are we collecting, how long we're storing, to what we're using it for and where AI is being applied to it. And without that initial data governance and having that top-down approach, that policy approach, it becomes extremely more muddled and more difficult to be able to answer those questions as regulations start to pop up.
I think another part of it too is, your data a lot of times doesn't reside, is enterprise, right? The entire enterprise uses it. And so if you have a lot of times what you find is there is a product that a client may acquire, maybe a cataloging solution, and it's a data governance solution for the organization, and that product becomes their data governance program. Mm-hmm. But it's by a particular group, one very small group, that's now responsible for deploying it. And then they are now challenged with, okay, defining that data. But the data is being used by many other groups. And so they all define it differently. And how do you now get that group and that manager or that director to then go tell another director in another group about how to define the data, how to use the data, how to put access controls? And so the importance, as Garth mentioned, about top-down is where you need to have an established framework, an operating model already in place that's directing the organization about what is going to be happening around data governance. So when that individual group or that small group is going to put in place that particular tool or that particular process, it's not just considered from that group, but when they need the authority to go dictate to another group or to collaborate, right, in order to come up with a solution, you're able to do that. And so if it starts at the bottom and you're pushing up, you're gonna meet a lot of challenges in trying to execute your data governance program. And as you break it out into the individual functions. So having executive leadership and a committee that is across the organization, that is not just your practitioners, but your legal, your compliance teams, and everyone on board helps to drive that top-down approach, and so that you can have an enterprise data governance program versus a data governance program that's just specific within a particular group.
Just maybe add to what you said, right? So also, like, I think that one critical part is the data ownership, right? So I think I mentioned that, and this is also tied back to when I addressed the previous question. So definitely I agree on that top-down approach. But meantime, I think you said very well, the data ownership might be in that kind of structure. However, horizontally, that data consumption, right, can be leveraged by many different applications, products, digital products in your ecosystem, so that different stakeholder groups will be needed there as well. So if you look at really depending on organization complexity, right, like in Johnson & Johnson, very complex organization across different sectors and functions. So we have to not only just that ownership itself, that ownership in broader sense in terms of we need to even identify the whole RESI chart, right? So which groups might be need to be informed, which groups might be consulted, right, in that model as well. And then also, healthcare is a heavily regulated industry sector. So echo to your point, I think that all, the policy, regulation, compliance is a critical piece in this, whole data governance, model and operating model, that how it should look like as well. Yeah.
So just a quick last piece. I think, yes, there needs to be top-down prioritization, emphasis, right? Because unless it's important to the folks higher up, it's never going to happen. But I think what that also, just to give a slightly different angle to this, what that also results in sometimes, it feels like it's been shoved down on you. So, but that's not the intent or anything, right? So where I see a lot of success is places where they're taking that direction and the mandate, but also understanding the different stakeholders, like a bunch of them were named already, legal, compliance, product, business, and identifying key questions that are important to them, right? How are you going to go enable them and make their lives easier because all of this exists, right? And then tracing that mandate to these questions and the stakeholders, and then making sure that everything that you do is ultimately enabling that. So that's how you can kind of hopefully complete the loop on this whole thing.
Maybe I can share a little bit experience in Johnson & Johnson. So exactly right. So such complex organization like J&J, right? That top down is easy to say, but hard to do, right? So the way how it works in J&J, we have enterprise level, called the Data Science Council and Data Management Council. So that council, with all the executive level leaders from different business sectors and functions, and they report to CIO directly, right? CIO as the EC level, sponsor of that data science and data management council. So we have direct communication channels. So that's really how we operationalize and implement this top-down approach, right? Drive that data governance, structure, model, and a strategy. So yeah.
And I think that one other thing, and I liked the sort of, the strategy needs to be set from by the top, but there need to be individual owners within an organization because it's too large. And you also then need to have been very, very clear about all of the various different use cases that data is being collected for in the first place, because there'll be all sorts of regulatory and data privacy and all sorts of other things that attach to those use cases. And as we're probably going to come on and talk about in a minute, that then becomes incredibly important when you're sort of thinking about applying AI on top of that, because you may well have been collecting all of this wonderful data already for whatever purposes you imagined 10 years ago, 20 years ago, when that first started being collected. And now all of a sudden there's a completely different use case that needs to be applied back to that, which creates another regulatory challenge. So actually being kind of AI fit in relation to that is very important. And it does need strategic leadership, but it also needs buy-in at that kind of tactical operational level as well. So maybe if we sort of move on to that, how does the process change when you add AI into the mix? Because we've now got something that was already incredibly complicated, and we've just decided to put this additional layer of hyper complication on top of that. So, any thoughts on what you need to do to an existing data governance framework in order to make it kind of fit for an AI future?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. So, as we look at data governance, one of the sessions I ran yesterday, I talked about what an enterprise AI model looks like, right? So, as you kind of look at the bucket list of what are the components you need to make sure you drill down right? Everything from what data mapping looks like, having a robust, living and breathing data mapping that's not just updated, 6 months or when you put up an asset, but something that is updated consistently. There's accountability drawn. So anytime you're touching the asset, when you're creating a record of process activity, that you're actually has accountability, ownership drawn to it, right? That's an extremely important element part of it, right? But there are other core practices, particularly as you address AI, right? What are you doing from a data protection standpoint? How are you making sure this data is protected, particularly as you start intertwining cloud solutions into this environment, where there's expectations of different platforms that are integrating into your data, right? Where does the protection come in, and how are those specific hooks that work into your environment working in this other environment that may be touching AI component of it, right? So there are other components in terms of what you do, and regulators are going to be very keen on looking at what part, particularly if you're in the public sector and if you're applying this towards individuals, what are you doing to address automated decision making, right? Where's the transparency? And if there is a data subject access request related to what AI is being applied, are you able to answer those questions, right? Because these are the questions that regulators are asking right now, right? They may not have put it up in form of regulation, but it's coming, right? But they're specifically asking these questions, and they're kind of focusing, whether you go to a regulator in the US from FTC or UK's ICO office or other data protection authorities within Europe. These are the questions they're asking, right? And how are individuals being protected? And then specifically, and this is the most important one, I think, transparency and explainability, right? Back to data governance, right? As you're applying this AI, if you're not able to provide that transparency, and particularly, I want to kind of pause here for a second. A lot of times we have B2B companies that kind of look at this and say, well, I'm creating this algorithm, or I'm creating this capability. It's not my responsibility to really address this question. The end user, the customer, I'm telling the client, and how they're applying it, they'll need to worry about it. Actually, that's not correct, right? You're going to have to show exactly where this data that you're creating, the sourcing data, how is this being applied? How are you creating this? Is this clean? Do you have clearance, IP rights to this data? So again, back to the data governance structure. So this is not a question you should ignore, particularly if you're planning to sell, whether B2C or B2B environment, right? Getting that transparency, explainability is going to be essential and component of getting this right.
Also, I think just practically thinking about that, right? You guys might hear all the buzzwords a lot. But I think practically you need to understand where your data is in your organization first. What data do you have? And a lot of organizations might be jumping to AI, but they don't have a good understanding of their data landscape. Where is my data spread? Is it defined? Do I understand how it's classified? Do I understand how that data should be used? And so one of the first steps that you have to do in preparation for even getting down the road of explainability and understand the lineage of where the data came from or how it's going to be used in a model is you have to understand your data landscape first, your data architecture. How is the data being moved through your systems? What are the different transformations that are happening? And that's a part of cataloging, right? That's a part of also not just cataloging your data and your processes, but also cataloging your models a lot of times the purpose with which a data scientist is creating a model is not documented anywhere for anyone to be able to find out why they created that model. What was the thought process? What was the purpose that was set? How was the data that was being used to feed into that model curated, right? Was it cleansed? Was that data trusted before it was used in the model, right? Because you think about the maturity of going from analytics into, decision making based on, predictions and forecasting. You need to make sure that that data was trusted before it was used by a data scientist to create a model. So some of those practical things is making sure that you have a data quality framework in place. And quality is not just the quality from, the data is accurate and the data is complete and consistent, but it's also identifying changes in the data, right? Data observability is important because now if you don't understand how your data is changing, then you introduce opportunities for bias, right? And you introduce opportunities for drift and other complex, data modeling considerations that you may not realize if you're not making sure that your data governance operations are handling those things and you have a good understanding of where your data is, what your data is, making sure your data is classified properly, making sure you have a really good data quality framework, and making sure that your data scientists and the work that they're doing give the leadership the opportunity to be able to go and say, I can explain what this is doing, why it's doing it, and how the outcome is going to potentially have an impact on the organization, the decision that they make.
Quick thing to add, I think another thing of making it real within enterprises. So large enterprises, tons of complexity. But what I've also seen work is, having built startups, having built products. It's also how do you apply product thinking to this, right? In terms of so everybody talks about data as a product, and that's a key aspect. A lot of dimensions of who's the owner. Are you not just worrying about where it's sourced from, quality, in what mechanisms will it be consumed, all of that. But also just that product mindset, right? Think about it as a like this is a service that you're delivering to the enterprise. So even write up user stories. Who are going back to those stakeholders? Write up those user stories. What are their challenges? Make it relatable to them. I think there was a question in the audience about how do you really get buy-in, right? So of course there needs to be a mandate. There is no board today that will say I'm okay with not having data governance. Everybody needs it. It's like fiduciary responsibility after a certain point of time. But reality is nobody wants to easily invest in it, right? Because even coming up with the investment's difficult. So it's got to be how do you break it down, apply that product mindset to the entire ecosystem, write up these user stories, value proposition, and then go back and forth. It won't happen in one pass.
Yeah, maybe just to add a couple quick points here, right?
Of course.
So I just want to emphasize two things, right? Because this we talk about the future, future how that data governance model should look like. This is a very fast evolving and dynamic space. I would challenge everybody in the room, right? When you look at your today's data governance structure and model, right? You need to really have that forward thinking to think about if years down the road, right? Is this still fit for purpose? Because I think regulation and the whole data ethics and policy, right, is a fast evolving space as well. And the different countries, different government agencies, right, also kind of exploring this space. I think this is a very open space in the AI era because AI offer lots of opportunities on the table, right, to the business, but meantime pose lots of challenges as well, and the regulations will fast evolve in this space too. And meantime, I would say that AI will help, that drive some kind, policy generation in that to fit for purpose for future data governance as well. And the other, like, ChatGPT, large language model, even in J&J, we run some kind of exercise, right, to explore that kind of potential opportunity to help, drive some kind of internal guidelines and policy generation, right, by leveraging those generative AI technologies. The other aspect is how AI will impact your data governance model in the future in terms of processes. I think you touched on that already. So a lot more automation will happen in that space to streamline things and really kind of hook up the whole value chain, right, in that space.
Yeah. One story of when it's worked really, really well and good data governance has sort of avoided a problem. If anyone's feeling brave, one story of when maybe that's not happened and something's gone wrong because of a lack of governance, and maybe one top tip. So if we can cover one each of those things, one person for each one, perhaps.
I guess my good story and the horror story are the same. So
Oh, there you go, two for
it's
one.
a before and after, right? So I'll take a two for there. So a pretty big bank, a common name that most people in the room probably have interacted with. So as we were going in and building out the underlying data platform, a lot of ML ops, various things, etc. One of the things we realized as we unraveled a few things was when it came to some of their credit and risk decisioning stuff, it's like a couple of key features, variables, 8 to 10 different variations and definitions, depending on the the department or the group and all of that, right? So to the extent that ultimately, and this luckily got caught a little earlier, those different variations in two different contexts were giving two different answers, right? That's like, and this was supposed to be, so if you logged into their portal, ultimately you would, there's odds that you would see both decisions and they could contradict. So then of course this was a big problem. So it was all a matter of like, in that space, it wasn't like an enterprise-wide thing, but in that space, it kind of kicked in that thing of how do we solve for this, right? So right from the sourcing of data, wherever the data is brought from, to up to the features, building in this forward lineage, backward lineage, dependencies. So essentially built a homegrown thing that allowed for that governance. And the side effect, while it addressed those issues, was what took probably a year and a half to go build a real product and 3-4 months for iterations came down to a couple of months and days and weeks, right? So it's one of these things where governance saves you, but also speeds things up. It's a time to market benefit too.
Consistency. Quick top tip, and then we'll go for questions if we can.
Yeah, I'll make this quick. So I mentioned example. I think we've done a pretty good job of being able to not only show what the value proposition behind data governance looks like, but how we're showing it to our customers. So one of the things you could see the artifacts directly on our websites. If you go to johnsoncontrols.com/privacy, you'll see a product called Data Privacy Sheets. So for us, we have something that provides that transparency, that shows exactly what the product's about, what type of personal information is being collected from the product, what is it being used for, what are the elements around that, what the deletion retention schedule is, what are the sub-processors involved for this, the scalability of this product and how it's deployed, because we produce global solutions, including where the sub-processors data centers reside and what the legal cross-border transfer frameworks are to allow us to have that portability of that data, so we don't have to stand up a localized solution of that data. Now, with these sheets, we've been able to really captivate our solutions to provide that transparency and really win over our customers, particularly our complex customers that we're creating complex solutions around. Now, on the flip side of it, I've seen Fortune 5 companies struggle with this, right? I've seen companies lose major smart city contracts, billions of dollars of smart city contracts, because they're not able to provide that transparency with their suppliers, with the public, with the individuals to say what is happening with this data. So, just to kind of paraphrase, just to recap that story, it's an area where we've been able to really demonstrate success around it. And then finally for that, you look at AI Act, I think we're looking at these sheets now going back and saying, okay, for the products where AI is being applied, we're now able to show transparency. Where is the AI being applied, particularly if there's personal information where AI is being applied to, why is it being applied and what is it being used for? So looking at AI Act and will allow us to comply with regulations, not just AI Act, but other regulations that pop up. So back to that, having that strong data governance structure will give you a strong value proposition in commercializing your capabilities for your organization.
I'm afraid we are just about out of time, so I would very much like to thank all of my panelists for what has been a great discussion, so well done.